Millions of people across the U.S. and cities around the world took part in a new round of No Kings protests this weekend. The mass movement, spanning more than 2,500 demonstrations, drew massive crowds. Demonstrators are calling for an end to what they describe as authoritarian rule, accusing President Donald Trump of abusing his power.
Across the United States, millions of protesters have filled the streets chanting a single phrase: no thrones, no crowns, no kings. The No Kings movement has become the loudest cry of defiance against President Donald Trump's second-term agenda. What began as a small rally in June has evolved into more than 2,500 coordinated demonstrations across major cities and capitals around the world. Their message is simple: America will not bow to authoritarian rule. But this unrest isn't only about politics. It's about a country under strain, an economy weighed down by tariffs, inflation, and a government that's been shut for weeks. Behind the roar of the protests lies a growing realization that Trump's America First experiment is beginning to unravel from within. And just across the northern border, Canada is rewriting the rules of the very trade war Trump started. While he tries to tighten his grip, Ottawa is quietly turning restraint into leverage and exposing how his grand economic gamble may be collapsing under its own weight.
The protests didn't emerge from nowhere. They are the product of a country stretched thin. The U.S. is entering its fourth government shutdown in less than 6 years as Congress battles over healthcare cuts and immigration policy. Federal workers are furloughed, agencies paralyzed, and ordinary families left uncertain about paychecks. Meanwhile, the economy that Trump once called unbeatable is losing its shine. The International Monetary Fund estimates U.S. growth at roughly 2% in 2025, but that modest figure hides deeper problems. The national deficit has ballooned to 6.5% of GDP, and investors are fleeing the dollar. This month, gold hit a record $4,300 per ounce, a signal that markets no longer see U.S. debt as a safe bet. Political anger and economic anxiety now feed one another. Trump's critics say his obsession with power, controlling the Fed, silencing the press, weaponizing tariffs, has turned America's greatest asset, its stability, into a source of risk. The No Kings rallies have become a mirror of that unease, a society demanding accountability from a government that increasingly rules by decree. Even among conservatives, quiet concern is growing. Business associations that once celebrated Trump's protectionism now warn that the wave of tariffs is driving up prices and choking trade. Farmers are frustrated by collapsing export markets. And while Trump projects confidence, the mood on Wall Street has shifted from optimism to caution, a sign that his once solid economic foundation is beginning to crack.
In Canada, the trade war has produced its own headlines. The Stellantis Jeep Compass shift from Brampton, Ontario to Illinois erased nearly 3,000 Canadian jobs and created 5,000 positions in the U.S., a symbolic victory for Trump's reshoring campaign. Yet behind the scenes, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government has chosen an unconventional path. Instead of retaliating with new tariffs, Ottawa dropped dozens of counter-duties on U.S. and even Chinese goods. A 100-page order quietly removed levies on steel, aluminum, and other industrial products, decisions that angered domestic producers but signaled a clear shift from confrontation to negotiation. Carney's team argues that in this climate, escalation would be self-destructive. Canada's approach, officials say, is to stabilize markets and preserve access to Washington's supply chains while preparing for deeper reforms in 2026 when the USMCA faces review. In public, Carney framed it simply: there's a time to hit back and a time to talk. Behind those words lies a strategy to turn patience into power. While Trump raises tariffs to pressure Canada, Ottawa is positioning itself as the steady hand in a volatile region, a contrast to the chaos in Washington. This quieter strategy is earning attention abroad. European and Asian trade officials see Canada as a model for small economies facing U.S. pressure. Instead of confrontation, it's using predictability as a diplomatic weapon, keeping global investors calm while the U.S. faces domestic unrest. For Carney, this could be the most significant foreign policy test of his tenure.
To Trump's former trade advisors, like Kellyanne Shaw, the coming deal will be a better arrangement, yet that phrase now carries a different meaning. Instead of cementing U.S. dominance, it hints at a compromise shaped by Canada's endurance. The logic is simple. Trump's tariffs on steel, aluminum, and trucks were meant to bring manufacturing home, but those same tariffs disrupted U.S. automakers, inflated input costs, and forced new dependence on Canadian and Mexican supply lines. Stellantis may have moved production, yet its Illinois plant still relies on Canadian steel and aluminum, materials now flowing tariff-free after Ottawa's recalibration. Trump's White House wanted Canada to bend. Instead, it built an opening for structured cooperation. The United States is learning that it cannot isolate itself without raising prices on its own consumers. As talks continue in Washington, Canadian officials quietly report progress in 3 sectors: energy, aluminum, and automotive, areas where both sides seek stability before the USMCA 2026 review. The irony is striking. The very tariffs designed to weaken Canada have forced the U.S. to negotiate terms that look more balanced than before. The result is a North American economy slowly realigning itself, not around Washington, but around interdependence. U.S. factories still need Canadian metals, Canadian energy still powers American cities, and cross-border supply chains remain inseparable. Trump's attempt to dominate has instead proved how integrated both nations truly are. As darkness falls on another day of protests, chants of "No Kings" echo through American streets. They capture more than political anger. They express a collective rejection of one-man rule, whether in government or in trade. Across the border, Canada's quiet defiance tells a parallel story. While Trump builds walls of tariffs, Ottawa is proving that restraint can be a weapon of its own. Carney's government is not winning through confrontation, but through calculation, turning Trump's unpredictability into an opportunity for structural reform. The stakes stretch far beyond North America. Global markets are watching whether Democratic allies can withstand the weight of Trump's protectionism without fracturing. Canada's gamble to wait, negotiate, and outlast may yet redefine how smaller nations manage power in a world led by giants. The United States faces discontent at home and diminishing control abroad. The man who once promised to make America untouchable now finds his strongest challenges not from foreign rivals, but from within and just next door. The No Kings movement may have started as a protest, but its spirit extends far beyond Washington. It's a reminder that in every system built on power, eventually, the subjects stop bowing.
You know, President Trump wants to come after the jobs and create uncertainty, not only in Canada, but across the world.
And we're going to begin in Washington, where Prime Minister Mark Carney is heading for yet another high-stakes meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, a critical moment as Canada is seeking tariff relief.
The days before one of the year's most anticipated meetings, the mood in Washington feels tense. Prime Minister Mark Carney is preparing to meet U.S. President Donald Trump on October 7, his second trip to the White House since taking office. Back home, critics demand results. In Ottawa, his team chooses every word carefully. But before Carney even boards his flight, the story shifts. In Quebec City, at the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers Conference, several American governors from Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania speak out against the tariffs, straining relations between their country and Canada. They remind everyone that more than 55 million jobs depend on the cross-border economy. These are not foreign observers. They are Trump's own partners, warning that his trade policies are hurting their communities. For years, Trump has described tariffs as proof of strength. Now, those same policies are drawing resistance from inside America. What was meant to pressure Canada is starting to pressure Washington itself. As Carney prepares for the meeting, he carries with him the unexpected support of U.S. governors who have publicly stood with Canada.
You know, we are friends, we're allies.
Canada got some support from a delegation of governors from Great Lakes states, all of which are closely tied to the Canadian economy.
What is not helpful is the way in which the president has demeaned our neighbors in the north, suggesting that they should be the 51st state. I respect Canadian sovereignty.
The reason is simple economics. The Great Lakes region is one of the most integrated industrial corridors in the world. The auto industry, steel producers, and aluminum smelters on both sides of the border operate as a single system. When tariffs slice through that network, they don't separate rivals from friends. They break the same machine both depend on. In automobiles, for example, a single North American car crosses the border several times before reaching the showroom. Parts made in Windsor often travel to Detroit for assembly and return to Ontario for finishing. Each tariff on metals or components adds cost at every crossing. For factories in Michigan and Ohio, that means higher prices and slower schedules. The metals that feed those plants tell the same story. Canada supplies roughly 90% of the primary aluminum imported by the United States, most used in cars and aircraft. Steel from Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie becomes the raw material for mills in Illinois and Pennsylvania. When Washington taxes those imports at 25 to 50%, U.S. manufacturers pay more for materials they cannot source domestically. Energy links reinforce the dependency. Pipelines and power lines cross the border daily, keeping refineries and auto plants running. Ontario and Quebec rely on U.S. natural gas, while American states rely on Canadian electricity and oil. The supply chain moves in both directions. That is why the governors of Michigan, Minnesota, and New York are alarmed. Every new tariff threatens thousands of local jobs, from assembly lines in Detroit to ports along Lake Superior. Even brief disruptions ripple through transport and retail. By defending Canada, these governors are protecting their own voters. They know that punishing Canada means punishing themselves. Their message is practical. Keep the border open or risk breaking an economy that sustains both nations. For Carney, that shared interest transforms his trip. He represents not only Canada, but an industrial region stretching from Ontario's auto belt to Ohio's steel towns. Out of that conference emerges a quiet but powerful alliance. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford and Quebec's Premier François Legault stand with their U.S. counterparts to stress cooperation over confrontation. For decades, the Great Lakes region has functioned as one economy. Cars assembled in Detroit rely on parts from Windsor. Aluminum from Quebec feeds aerospace plants in New York. This regional unity gives Carney an advantage ahead of his meeting. He can present himself not as a foreign petitioner, but as a partner speaking for a shared industrial base. The governor's support offers political cover and moral leverage in Washington. Across the Midwest, workers and business owners are realizing that their prosperity depends on the same open border that Trump's tariffs are closing. In Washington, Carney's team is finalizing briefing notes for the October 7 meeting. According to CBC News and Radio Canada, the main goal is partial relief on steel tariffs and a framework for future reductions. Officials are careful not to raise expectations. Trump's unpredictability is well known in Ottawa. The White House is also under pressure from a partial government shutdown and business groups warning of higher costs. Within that environment, Carney will argue that Canada is a trusted ally whose industries are vital to U.S. growth and security. His leverage comes from three fronts. First, critical minerals. Canada supplies nickel, cobalt, and lithium, all listed by the U.S. Department of Defense as strategic. Second, defense spending. Carney's plan to expand Canada's military budget by tens of billions could translate into contracts for U.S. suppliers if trade tensions ease. Third, political support from U.S. governors urging tariff relief. Trump still holds the power to adjust or keep duties under Section 232, but rising frustration from border states makes a limited compromise possible. Analysts expect any early progress to center on aluminum, where U.S. factories rely heavily on Canadian imports. Lumber, tied to domestic politics, will likely remain unchanged. As the meeting nears, the real question is not whether Carney secures everything he wants, but whether Trump can afford to keep everything he has. Whatever happens on October 7, the political landscape in North America has already shifted. Trump's tariffs, once seen as a display of power, are now testing his own coalition. The Governors' Conference in Quebec City was a warning that economic pain does not stop at the border. In a region so integrated, punishing a neighbor often means punishing yourself. For Canada, this week is a moment to prove that patience and strategy can outlast bluster. Carney is entering the talks with a clear message that Canada's strength lies not only in its resources, but in its relationships with workers, businesses, and now with American leaders who see their futures linked to its success. The tariff war of 2025 has no victors yet, but the debate has changed. When American governors stand beside Canadian premiers to defend a shared economy, it signals a new kind of politics, one that recognizes the real battle is not between nations, but between cooperation and self-inflicted harm. As the White House meeting draws near, both countries wait. For Trump, the choice is whether to double down or step back. For Carney, the test is whether he can turn growing American frustration into meaningful relief. And for millions of workers across the Great Lakes, the stakes could not be clearer. Their jobs and the future of North America's economy now depend on what happens next in Washington.
The country would rather not have to pay $100,000, but they'd rather, how do you do that? You hire Americans.
It really just makes me hesitant to consider working in the U.S., makes me want to explore opportunities in other countries outside of the U.S. and definitely looking at Canada.
Recent grads are will not be in a position to be able to justify that $100K upfront that the visa is going to require.
Could Trump's new H-1B visa fee push top talent to Canada? That question is being asked in lecture halls, startup incubators, and boardrooms across North America. In late September 2025, President Donald Trump signed a proclamation that fundamentally reshapes America's approach to high-skilled immigration. At the heart of this shift is a $100,000 annual fee for the H-1B visa, the work permit that has allowed hundreds of thousands of engineers, software developers, and scientists to build their careers in the United States. Alongside it, the administration unveiled a so-called gold card visa costing $1 million and a platinum card for $5 million, framed as luxury pathways to U.S. residency. Trump argues that these measures will protect American jobs and wages by discouraging companies from hiring cheaper foreign labor. Yet, as the policy begins to ripple across the economy, questions are mounting. Will this actually safeguard employment at home, or will it undermine America's long-standing advantage in global talent? Early signs suggest that Canada, America's closest neighbor and competitor, may be the unexpected winner. The H-1B program has long been a cornerstone of U.S. innovation. It grants temporary work authorization to foreign professionals in specialized fields such as engineering, information technology, biotechnology, and finance. For decades, U.S. companies have relied on it to fill talent shortages. According to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, more than 70% of H-1B petitions in recent years have been filed on behalf of workers from India and China. For big tech companies, the H-1B is not optional. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon all recruit heavily from universities and research labs abroad, and they bring in top graduates from Canadian schools, such as the University of Waterloo. Since the 1990s, Waterloo has sent as many as 1 in 10 of its graduates south each year, supplying Silicon Valley with a steady pipeline of software engineers. By attaching a $100,000 annual fee to this process, Trump's new rule creates an economic filter. While trillion-dollar giants like Amazon and Google may still pay the cost, early-stage startups simply cannot. Venture capital-backed firms that once dreamed of hiring the brightest global minds will now face a barrier they cannot climb. In practice, this means America risks losing the very ecosystem of entrepreneurial dynamism that has defined its global leadership in technology. The most immediate consequence is uncertainty. For students finishing graduate degrees in artificial intelligence or cybersecurity, the new fee changes the calculus of moving to the U.S. dramatically.
Many say they cannot justify the idea of a six-figure annual cost attached to their employment. This policy also strikes at startups. Each year, roughly 85,000 new H-1B visas are issued, but small firms will now find themselves priced out. Big tech can absorb the cost, but smaller innovators cannot. Analysts already warn that some U.S. companies may shift development work to India or expand their research teams in Canada, where the visa landscape is less restrictive. For Canada, the opening could not be clearer. Universities like Waterloo already rank among the top training grounds for global technology talent. Each year, hundreds of its graduates weigh offers from Silicon Valley. With the new H-1B fee, many will now look closer to home. Cities such as Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are already thriving tech hubs, supported by Canada's Global Talent Stream program, which can process skilled visas in as little as 2 weeks. Prime Minister Mark Carney has described this moment as a great opportunity for Canada. While his government has not yet unveiled a detailed strategy, the political message is clear. Canada can market itself as the open, affordable alternative to the United States. With express entry, the startup visa, and generous pathways for permanent residency, Canada already offers a friendlier environment for ambitious young engineers and scientists. The difference is particularly sharp for startups. Canadian firms raising their first rounds of venture capital no longer face the same disadvantage in recruiting against Silicon Valley. Instead, they can argue that staying in Canada avoids the crushing cost of the H-1B. For the first time in decades, the talent equation may tilt north rather than south. Trump's policy was designed to protect American workers, yet in practice, it risks weakening the very sectors that power the U.S. economy. High-skilled immigrants are not displacing local workers. They fill gaps in areas where domestic supply is insufficient and generate new companies, patents, and tax revenues. By discouraging their arrival, the U.S. could see an erosion of its innovation base. Canada, meanwhile, stands to gain by keeping more of its graduates and attracting talent from abroad. If even a fraction of these workers redirect their ambitions toward Toronto or Vancouver, the economic impact will be significant. America may end up with fewer engineers in Seattle, while Canada becomes stronger in Waterloo and Toronto. Adding to the confusion is the legal landscape. Immigration lawyers have already filed challenges arguing that such an extreme fee exceeds the executive branch's authority. Courts may ultimately block or modify the policy, but the damage to confidence has been done. For companies weighing where to build their next research center, the perception of instability matters as much as the actual rule. Meanwhile, Congress is signaling a willingness to revisit the rules for both H-1B and L-1 visas. Bipartisan senators have introduced bills aimed at reform. This creates a climate of unpredictability. For firms making multi-year investments, uncertainty about visa costs is itself a deterrent. Big tech is lobbying heavily against the change, arguing that curbing skilled immigration hands advantage to rivals abroad. Whether they succeed or not, the episode shows how immigration has become a flashpoint in Trump's second term. Looking ahead, the stakes are not small. The global race for talent is intensifying. The European Union is expanding its blue card system. Australia continues to offer streamlined visas for skilled workers. If the United States erects barriers while others lower them, the balance of power in innovation could shift. Canada's opportunity is especially strong because of proximity. For workers who once dreamed of Silicon Valley, Toronto offers a comparable tech scene with easier access. Major U.S. firms already operate large campuses in Canada, from Google in Kitchener-Waterloo to Amazon in Vancouver. If Washington makes it harder to bring talent into the U.S., those same firms can simply expand north of the border. The broader picture is that talent, like capital, flows to where it is treated best. In the 21st century, economic power will be determined less by who controls trade routes or resources and more by who attracts the best minds. On that front, the United States risks trading away its edge. So what does this all add up to? A policy designed to defend American jobs may end up exporting them. By attaching a $100,000 annual fee to the H-1B, Trump has placed a toll booth on the highway of global talent. While the intention is to slow the flow, the result may be to reroute it. Canada, with its open arms and lower barriers, could be the beneficiary. Universities, startups, and entire cities may find themselves enriched by talent that once would have gone south. For the U.S., the longer this policy stands, the greater the risk of falling behind in the only competition that truly matters in the modern economy, the competition for human capital. Trump promised to put America first, yet in the arena of innovation, this move may put America second. Could Trump's new H-1B visa fee push top talent to Canada? The answer is becoming clearer every day. This is not just an immigration story. It is a story of economic strategy, and it may be remembered as one of the most consequential backfires of his presidency.
And Canada called me a couple of weeks ago. They want to be part of it. To which I said, well, why don't you just join our country? You become 51, become the 51st state, and you get it for free.
Canada does not shrink from global challenge.
Well, I disagree with anything that guy says. He drives me crazy.
At the end of September, two speeches revealed how wide the gap has grown between Washington and Ottawa. In Quantico, President Donald Trump stood before military leaders and celebrated America's new missile defense project called the Golden Dome. He described it as the most advanced shield in the world and then pointed to Canada. According to Trump, Ottawa wanted to join, but his reply was blunt: "Become the 51st state and you get it for free." Meanwhile, in New York, Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand told the United Nations that retreat is not an option and Canada will not turn inward. The contrast could not be sharper. Trump frames tariffs and security as bargaining chips, while Canada insists on independence and global engagement. This is the stage on which the tariff battles are now playing out. Since returning to the White House in January 2025, Trump has rolled out a new wave of tariffs that even America's closest allies did not expect. Lumber, kitchen cabinets, heavy trucks, and branded medicines have all been swept into the tariff net. For Trump, these moves prove toughness. For allies, they send a message that friendship does not mean exemption. The administration argues that the strategy is already paying off. In his Quantico speech, Trump claimed that the United States attracted $17 trillion in new investment in just 8 months, a figure he contrasted with the lack of inflows under President Biden. The claim reflects the mood at the White House, where tariffs are seen as leverage to pull factories, auto plants, and technology hubs back to U.S. soil. Yet the economic picture is more complicated. Industry data show that roughly 80% of upholstered furniture and about half of cabinets sold in the United States are imported. Tariffs in these areas raise costs for builders, retailers, and households. Families already burdened by mortgage rates above 6% now face higher renovation costs. The short-term boast of investment is shadowed by higher prices and mounting frustration among partners. Canada's answer is to move in the opposite direction. Standing before the UN General Assembly, Anand insisted that Canada will continue to strengthen multilateral institutions and remain a stable partner in both business and security. That message reflects a clear strategy. Ottawa has accelerated trade diversification with the European Union, Indonesia, Mexico, and the United Kingdom. New resource projects in cobalt, nickel, and lithium are positioned as anchors for an independent North American supply chain that does not rely solely on U.S. approval. The Ontario government's September pledge of $17.5 million Canadian dollars to support North America's first cobalt refinery alongside U.S. and federal contributions shows how Canada is using global demand for critical minerals to build leverage. By presenting itself as a reliable, rules-based partner, Canada turns the pressure of American tariffs into momentum for new alliances. Instead of being cornered, Ottawa is carving out space to act on its own terms. Taken together, these developments reveal the cost of Trump's approach. The United States is projecting strength through tariffs and investment claims, but it is also straining ties with allies. Canada is not folding. It is using the moment to reposition itself as a defender of international rules and a hub for new trade. Trump's line about Canada becoming the 51st state may have been delivered for effect, but it underscored how Washington sees tariffs and security as one package. For Canadians, that package looks more like a warning than a partnership. Tariffs can deliver headlines and temporary wins, yet in practice they risk driving allies away. The question that remains is whether this strategy will secure America's dominance or whether it will backfire by pushing countries like Canada to seek independence in the global order.
Canada could move $12 billion worth of food and beverage exports to non-U.S. markets, according to a new report by Farm Credit Canada. It's a strategy aimed at reducing our dependence on the U.S. market, which, as you know, remains strained.
Canada has unveiled a new plan that changes the balance in North American trade. According to a report by Farm Credit Canada, the country could redirect up to $12 billion Canadian dollars worth of food and beverage exports away from the United States. For decades, American policymakers assumed that Canada's agricultural sector would remain tied to the U.S. market. Now, under the pressure of President Trump's reciprocal tariffs, Ottawa is moving in the opposite direction. What was designed as a tool to force Canada back to the table is instead driving one of the largest diversification efforts in Canadian history. The numbers matter, but the story behind them matters even more. It is a story of how trade pressure intended to tighten control is opening the door to greater independence. The report from Farm Credit Canada outlines three main areas of action. The first is expanding interprovincial trade inside Canada itself. More investment in moving food products across provinces can reduce reliance on the single north-south corridor that dominates today. The second is using the free trade agreements that Canada already has with Europe and Asia. Those agreements give Canadian producers preferential access and make them competitive in sectors like dairy, grains, and beverages. The third is finding entirely new global markets where processed foods and vegetable oils could be shipped. The scale of the problem is clear. In 2018, 67% of Canadian food and beverage exports went to the United States. By the end of 2023, that share had risen to 76%. Farm Credit Canada warns that such dependence makes the industry vulnerable to sudden shifts in policy. The new target is to bring the U.S. share closer to 50%. Processed foods are especially promising because they have longer shelf life and can travel further. Vegetable oils are another growth area, as demand is expanding in multiple regions. The underlying message is straightforward. The United States will remain the top market, but it can no longer be the only one. For Washington, this strategy carries real consequences. Analysts estimate that roughly 2.6 billion Canadian dollars, or nearly $2 billion US dollars, in current food and beverage exports could be shifted out of the American market. That means U.S. importers may have to pay more to source the same goods from other countries. Depending on transport costs and availability, replacement could add $100 to $300 million in extra expenses each year. The overall scale is small compared with the $900 billion in annual two-way trade, but the symbolic impact is large. The deeper cost is political. America's tariffs were supposed to increase leverage over Ottawa. Instead, they are accelerating diversification. If Canada successfully builds durable supply routes to Europe and Asia, Washington will find it harder to use tariffs as a bargaining chip. For American consumers, the adjustment could mean higher prices for certain imported foods. For American farmers, the risk is that Canada becomes a stronger competitor in third markets where both countries are chasing the same demand. The effort to force Canada into line may end up reducing U.S. influence in the very sector it was trying to control. The lesson is visible in the numbers. In just 5 years, dependence rose from 67% to 76%, and only now is Canada charting the course to bring it back down. That change will not happen overnight. Farm Credit Canada makes clear that it will take years of investment and trade promotion, but the direction is set. Instead of locking Canada into closer dependence, Trump's tariff policy has pushed it to explore escape routes. The United States remains a vital partner, but it is no longer seen as the sole destination. This is the backfire effect of economic pressure. What began as an attempt to show strength may end as the moment Washington lost part of its grip on the Canadian food supply chain.